sickness, contagious.
Here I come, Jay-Z. There you go, there you go.
How we get down,
The format is real sickness, contagious.
Here I come, Jay-Z. There you go, there you go.
How we get down,
Jay-Z. Here I come, Jay-Z. Here I come, Jay-Z. Here I come, there you go. Here I come.
how we get down.
So, welcome to the Empowr podcast. We're here with Jeff Lindor. He is the founder of Groomed Success and the Gentleman's Factory, which we are here now at.
Jeff is the boss man out here in these streets, you know what I'm saying, in Brooklyn. You know what I mean? Bringing all the men of color out here together in an entrepreneurial capacity, making big things happen out here. Thanks for Jeff coming on to the show. We're about to bring massive value to everybody who's watching this.
Awesome. So, I'm Adam Cruz. We're also here with Joel Cabrera, host of the podcast. So, Jeff, welcome.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about just the different experiences you had working in the workforce and how you got to where you are now.
Well, again, thank you for having me, gentlemen. You know, I'm super excited about being on this show. So my professional background, you know, I've had a really interesting kind of like journey, you know. So I started out in finance at Chase. You know, I was, you know, doing some work at Chase while I was still in college. And, you know, I always had like some really great jobs, right? You know, so Chase, and then I worked for the state doing a lot of like, you know, drug prevention, community development work, primarily in central Harlem and in Bed-Stuy. And that's where I really learned how to like build community. You know, I was building like drug prevention coalitions together, like bringing in community stakeholders so that we could address the drug and alcohol problem that was in the community. And at that time, it was, I don't know if you guys remember Four Loko, right? You know?
Oh, man. Remember and kind of don't, because...
So it was myself and the team that, you know, helped to get Four Loko banned from New York State, right? You know, I don't like to say that publicly sometimes because some folks are like, oh, wait, like it was you, right? You know, it wasn't me, you know. I worked for an organization that primarily addressed that head on, right? And then from there, you know, I've done some like consulting work at CUNY, you know, a lot of communications work, and, you know, went off to graduate school, got a master's in urban policy where I really wanted to understand community more from a deeper lens. And then, you know, I worked in healthcare and I worked for the city of New York. So all of my like experiences, I would say, as I like climbed in my professional ladder, really dealt with like people, like how do you build community, how you add value to people, and how you help people. And that's how I got the name Mr. Community, right? Yeah.
Okay, nice. Yeah, and in each sector, there's a lot of different challenges and there's barriers. So what do you feel are the major differences between working in corporate America versus working in government and entrepreneurship?
So corporate America, you know, much like government, it's very political, right? So folks would say government is political. No, corporate America is political too, right? You know, so it's like, who's your ally? Who's the person that's going to help you climb up those ladders? And then what I've also realized too is that, you know, there's this notion you work hard and, you know, you put in your time and you get the promotion. You know, unfortunately, you know, that's actually not really the case, you know. So when you look at, you know, corporate structures and when you look at like who's in the executive chambers, you know, it's not necessarily representative of the company's clientele base, you know, and it's not representative of America, right? You know, so there's just always like a certain segment of the population that constantly gets, you know, promoted or get these C-level positions, whereas, you know, one now have to ask, are they the smartest folks on the planet? Or is there a structure in place that, you know, is designed to elevate one segment and not the other?
What would you say to somebody who's within an organizational structure, is a person of color, and is finding themselves in that situation where they're not moving up as maybe they feel like they should, you know, and it's everyone in the C-suite, for example, as you said, is white, right? What would you say to that person or those people in that situation?
Well, so one of my favorite quotes is if you do not define who you are, you will allow other people to define you. And when they define you, they'll use their own definition, right? So I think primarily it's really understanding who you are and the value that you place in the position that you're in. And if you're working for an organization that doesn't value you, and if you're extremely talented, go somewhere where you're valued, right? So that's number one, because talent, talented folks always have options, right? Always have options. So that's number one. And then number two, it's really, building relationships. I know that, with a person of color, it's unfortunate that we have to work twice as hard to get to the same level as other people, right? But, and then that's honestly why one of the reasons why I ventured off into the entrepreneurial space, whereas now, I can kind of dictate, my value out into the world while also solving a problem, right? So not everyone is built for entrepreneurship, but I think that, it's really important that you could kind of like determine your outcome and not constantly rely on other people to validate who you are and the value that you bring to the company.
Know your value. They're not valuing you. Get out of there. Start your own thing. Become the boss man. You heard?
Have options, right? Always have options.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about entrepreneurship, you also worked in education. Yeah. So there are a lot of family members who push their children, the youth in their family, to get into the workforce. At what point should a person know that, hey, maybe I'm an entrepreneur? Maybe these are the type of things I should be going into?
Well, so entrepreneurship is all about solving a problem, right? So if you're not solving a problem, then you're not an entrepreneur, right? So I think that there's this notion of, let me just be an entrepreneur because I don't want to work for anyone. No, if that's the driving force for someone to be an entrepreneur, then, they're most likely going to fail if they don't have the resources behind them to push them forward. Because the fact of the matter is that entrepreneurship is extremely difficult, and if you don't have a problem that you're solving, or if you don't have a product that solves problems, then you're going to go back to work because you're not going to be able to support yourself because you don't have a valuable product or service that people want, right? So I think that with entrepreneurship, yes, there is this level of independency, if you would, or there's that level of, freedom, sort of say, because you don't necessarily have someone like checking you, etc., like managing you and all of that. But there are some people who thrive in those environments where, there is that accountability. So if you're not a self-starter, and if you don't have like something that the market needs or wants, then go back to work. So it's definitely finding that balance, and it's just knowing what your purpose is, right? Because again, not everyone is an entrepreneur. I wasn't an entrepreneur, right? So like I didn't, like grow up saying that, I'm gonna like own my own business and things of that sort, right? I started the Gentleman's Factory off of a need of just seeing that there wasn't safe spaces for men of color to really build with one another, right? So like this all grew organically, as a result of seeing that there is such a void in safe spaces for us to build.
You mentioned about some people finding their purpose, right? How do you, for like the average person, how do you suggest that person goes about that?
Doing something that you don't mind not getting paid for, right? So when I started, the Gentleman's Factory and Groomed Success, I was in graduate school and I took a social entrepreneurship class where I learned how to build an enterprise off of what I was passionate about. And at the time I was passionate about fashion. I went to Parsons, I went to the New School. So that's like the fashion hub. And I was always passionate about community, hence my Instagram, Mr. Community NYC, right? So then I merged those two worlds together, and then I would do like gentlemen's brunches, and I would do events that was geared towards fashion but also geared towards community. And like everything just kind of grew organically. The first event that we had 50 guys that came out. I think it was in 2014. Next year, we had this really big mixer at the Carlton Hotel on Madison Avenue, where we had like about over 100 guys. And then we had another event at the Dazzler Hotel, I think it's now called the Tillery in downtown Brooklyn, over 200 gentlemen there. So there was just always things that was just happening organically, and I wasn't getting paid for it, anything like that. And then it wasn't a revenue driven model. It was just more so okay, how do like men come together and build, so as a result, that's where, the Gentleman's Factory kind of just grew into what it is today.
What are the benefits of having an organization that's everything's in-house versus being part of an organization that's more integrated?
Well, I mean, like one of the main purposes here is the fact that, we're realizing that we all are talented. We all are special. We all can grow together, and the main premise here at the Gentleman's Factory is that, men of color grow in isolation, right? Being isolated, you'll have achievements, but it'll be limited because you're doing it by yourself, right? So now my premise is, how do we now create community, build community, so that I can leverage your skill set, you can leverage my skill set, and then we can grow organically, So that's like one of the main premises is of just, coming together, because there aren't enough safe spaces that we can do such things.
So one of the things I've found myself going more into the direction of wanting to impact young men of color specifically, right? Because like I've been there, done that. I know what's happening in their heads. I know the obstacles that they're facing. I know that I know what type of support they actually need. And that's something that I really just care about, right? I guess that falls in line with like the whole purpose response that you gave earlier. And I'm finding myself wanting to build out an organization to service that, even using this podcast and everything we're doing, and in a more directed fashion towards this specific group, and even more. Going into schools and organizations and putting and giving them the services that they need. So programming, even staff trainings, right? That's kind of the direction that I feel like we're going into here. What would be some of your feedback in order to maybe execute on that successfully?
Well, like I would say, first find out like what exactly do you want to focus on specifically, and how do you measure that, right? Because going into youth development or serving people, it's such a beautiful thing, but it is very emotional, right? Because of the fact that the deeper you go, the more you realize how deep the problem is, right? So without really having like key metrics in place so that you can now measure the effectiveness of what you're doing, a lot of people get burned out, right? And, there is also the aspect of how are you going to financially sustain this? And a lot of people don't talk about, in our community, money is like taboo, right? It's like, oh my God, wait, why are you doing this for money? Or why do you do? Money brings forth sustainability. So if someone has an organization or a company that is a multi-million-dollar company, what that does, if someone is using that money so that they could buy a private jet, then it's like, come on, right? However, if someone is using that money so that they can hire the top minds on the planet so that they could provide the services and the systems in place so that they could really effectively affect change with that segment of the population, that's more effective, right? So, to answer your question, I guess like more directly, it's really finding out what area do you want to focus on, and how do you and how can you be great at that? Because the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. So going into something without fully tackling that segment that you want to, so for example, people ask me all the time, why are you not doing anything for the women, right? What about the women? What about the women? Yes, I know the women. Yeah. We're focusing on the men right now, right? And down the line, totally. And then I actually get upset when people say, oh, what about the women? Because I'm like, wait, so y'all think I'm going to die like tomorrow, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, we are just getting started. And I'm also honored that they're asking me about the women too, because then that means that I'm actually doing something good, right? You know what I mean? So they're like, oh, you know what? Like what you're doing for the men is really good. Now let's, address the women. So it is kind of like, oh, wow, you know what? Like there's market validation, right? But then there's also saying, dag, like, wait, like we're just getting started. I'm not going to die within the next 3 seconds, right? You know what I'm saying? Not going to wait 1, 2, 3. That's still a lot, right? So, we're only getting started.
Great. So, and I know you guys partner up with organizations that do service women.
Absolutely.
So what are some of these organizations, and maybe women can actually look into it and get involved?
Yeah, totally. Matter of fact, our last podcast, it was also check out the Gentleman's Faculty podcast for those. So it's on our website, and our guest is a judge, right? So a woman judge, Judge Christina Bonane, right? She's a judge, and the conversation wasn't about law; it was about male and female dynamics, right? And it was about dating and things of that sort, right? So it was a really interesting podcast. So I say all of that to say that, what we do here, the Gentleman's Factory isn't like this, like macho man, like super ultra masculine place where we're just talking to like degrading women and things of that sort. No, absolutely not. Like we're always asking women for input, and also partnering with different women organizations such as the sororities, and a lot of nonprofits, that services women, so that we can open up the dialogue and the conversation in a safe space so that we can be open and honest with each other.
So with women who are dating men who may have put themselves in isolation, what can a woman do on her part to help her man kind of get out of that isolation and get more involved in his community?
Well, so I mean, generally speaking, men, particularly men of color, we are really isolated, right? And the older that we get, the more isolated we become, and the less friends that we have, and the less, so it's kind of like we're kind of like stuck in our ways. And sometimes, we may have great ways, right? Or sometimes we may have ways that needs another viewpoint from a external partner to come into, like everyone kind of need consultants in a sense, right? So I think that, and going back to the reason why the Gentleman's Factory exists, right, is going back to the problem. The problem is that we're so isolated, and also from a community and a culture standpoint, society targets us specifically. So think about this, right? So if you have a segment of the population that is constantly being targeted through, the media, through, law enforcement, through, from housing to, a whole bunch of different areas from a public policy standpoint, and from a race standpoint, and from a historical standpoint. So if we've been targeted, men and women of color, by the way, right? So society's just not tackling us, right? Like it's men and women, but let's just talking about the men specifically for this for today. So if we're always being targeted, and when you look at the outlets or the places that we go to really address that, it's internal, right? So that's one of the reasons why our isolation comes in, because we feel as though no one really truly understands us, and we internalize everything because we haven't been conditioned to speak, right? So that's and mental health is a huge component to one of the things that we do here is like have mental health counselors, etc., so that we can just talk. So men, we don't talk, we don't talk, even when myself with my conversations with my wife, sometimes like I just don't verbalize myself, and then I just go into my hiding place internally, so
Because even culturally, growing up, a lot of times it's like, hey, as men, you don't talk about your emotions. You can't feel this way. Just move on and trudge past it.
absolutely.
So with things like this, it can be uncomfortable for people to open up or get that first start. Somebody who might want to but feels uncomfortable, what advice would you give them?
Talk, right? Talk, find, well, I mean, definitely come to the Gentleman's Factory, right? But, but find a supportive network where you feel safe, because the whole thing is safety, because if I talk, are they going to make fun of me? Are they going to think that I'm soft? I'm Superman, so me being Superman, I constantly have to show that I'm strong. Like another analogy that I love is, your strength is demonstrated in your ability to be gentle. And what that means is, imagine if someone who is, picking up this table right here, right? You're picking up the table and it's like a really heavy table, and then you're picking it up and then you're making a whole bunch of noise and you're like, and then you move this table to the other side of the room. Congratulations, you just lifted up a really heavy table. Everyone knew that it was heavy, and then you made a lot of noise picking it up. Good, congratulations. But can you imagine if you picked up that same table? Everyone knows it is heavy, but you picked it up with one hand without even making a sound. Everyone would say, wow, you know what? You were really strong. So I say all of that to say that we've been conditioned to feel and think that in order for us to be strong, we have to be loud and we have to be really aggressive, where our strength is really demonstrated in our ability to be gentle. So just be yourself.
What would you say to, I have a certain family member who I feel like he would definitely be able to benefit from mental health services, just being, I'm gonna just say that, period, right? But seems to be really closed off, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there going through similar things. What would you say to, those type of individuals who may feel like the world is against them and have this perception of life that is just so counterproductive? I would categorize it as. Yeah. What would you say to that?
Well, so I would definitely encourage them to go see a therapist, but the fact of the matter is that the likelihood of someone that fits that category, going to psychologytoday.com and choosing a therapist, it's really slim, right? You know what I mean? Because we're not, conditioned to even consider therapy, So I am now in therapy, but, luckily because one of my best friends, she's a psychologist, and she would constantly say, hey, Jeff, find one. And then she had to go on Psychology Today and go into her network and choose one for me, right? So not everyone has, Dr. Florence St. Jean as their best friend, right? You know what I'm saying? But in that, though, what I would give the recommendations to that person is, finding an outlet or finding, a safe space to just talk. And what I mean by that, when we were saying this off the recording, is that I would walk home a lot, right? And in me walking home, mind you, I live about 2.3 miles away from the Gentleman's Factory. So I walk to the Gentleman's Factory and walk home from the Gentleman's Factory every day. But in that, I'm like, that's my therapy time, right? That's the time where I'm talking to myself, right? Not that as though I'm crazy, right? You know what I'm saying? But that's kind of like a me time, right? That, all of the things that I'm going through in life, I'm able to kind of just like think about it, pray about it, walk and talk. You know what I mean? So what I would say to you with that individual is for him or her to find that safe space that they can go to.
There's also another dynamic to the mental health issues within the household and how family members should be handling the situation. Maybe they're not used to having that in the household, or they just don't know how to guide this person. So on the other side, with the family members, what are things that they can do to help encourage this person to find help, and that it's not a bad thing, and just understanding really how to deal with a situation like this? Yeah.
Truth be told, most of the times, folks are going through those problems because of their family members, right? You know what I mean? No, let me stop. So I would say that there needs to be like this overall education component in our, culture about, therapy. But then, I was listening to someone and he was saying how even on the therapy lens, not finding a good therapist of color that really understands and that's culturally competent, then they'll try to medicate you, right? You know what I'm saying? So like this is huge. So like when you look at just society here at the Gentleman's Factory, we really love to talk about race, right? You know what I mean? Like race is always the elephant in the room, right? You know what I mean? Here it's the room, right? You know, so in that it's really important that we really are culturally competent in terms of how society views us, treats us, and accommodates us, right? You know, so even so one of the barriers, and I was reading somewhere where, you know, one of the reasons why, you know, Black or brown families don't seek therapy is two things. One, trust issues, because there may be, you know, like they don't feel safe, you know, pouring out their personal information to a stranger. And then also too, like they may be then afraid of either them getting like, you know, a ACS case if it has to deal with their child, and or, you know, them being prescribed to medication where they may not be, you know, a cause for medication. I don't know, right? Like, so there's so many different barriers as to why. And, you know, there's maybe even a cost issue, right? You know what I mean? But, you know, lots of insurances pay for it. So, I mean, so there's a lot of ramifications, but, you know, all in all, what I would say, you know, definitely, you know, seek professional help for that individual. But, you know, just have that individual just find a safe space that they can go to, whether it be a church, whether it be the Gentleman's Factory, whether it be having good friends. One of the things that I did, you know, years ago, I established this group chat with like 5 friends, you know what I mean? And in that group chat, it's like a safe space that we can literally just say whatever, right? You know, if anyone wants to really get good information about me, they'll just go to that group chat, right? You know what I'm saying? but you know, like it's really important that you just find safe spaces that you can just be without having to put on a show.
So a lot of this community building, you've taken a leadership role to bring people together. What are things people can do within their family, within their circles, to take on a leadership role and bring people together? Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes people aren't ready yet. And also with those people who aren't ready yet, should you just let them be until they're ready? Or can you try and speed up the process to get them ready?
So what you really have to do is listen. You have to listen. Because in listening, you'll then now get a better understanding of why someone is the way that they is, or why they think the way that they do, or why they act or respond the way that they do, right? So it's really important, particularly if someone wants to take a leadership role, is to get a better understanding of why, so that you can now put in best practices for you to address their situations, right? You know what I mean? And, you know, best practices, what you may do for one person may not be good for someone else, right? You know, so especially from a family member's lens, right? You know, I have 2 children, young, 8 and 6, but the way that I, you know, address my 8-year-old is not the same way that I address my 6-year-old, right? And vice versa. It's the same household, they eat the same food, you know, they live in the same, you know, apartment, etc. All of that stuff, but my communication to both of them has to be altered because of how they respond to information, right? So leadership is all about listening, and then now seeing how you can continue to add value to the folks who you want to lead.
Trends, right? I want to talk about trends. Where do you see men of color going? And obviously, there's lots of technology changes, right? There's lots of population change in regards to like gentrification, things of that nature. Where do you see men of color? Let's say even we could even just talk about New York City if you want. Where do you see that? Where do you see us as a collective community within the next 5 years, 10 years?
So it's really important that we do come together, because society is moving really fast with technology, right? You know, so technology like speeds things up really quickly. So if we're not, if we continue to remain isolated while everyone else continues to build together, then the trend will then be destruction, because that's essentially what the trend has been, right? You know what I mean? And then when I say destruction, like I'm talking about, continuing to be, at the bottom of the wealth, the health, social, economic, you know what I mean? So things of that sort, right? So, so now my role now is helping to bring us together, and then there are lots of many fantastic organizations that does the same thing, right? So I want to, look to see how could the Gentleman's Factory, find our, niche and build on that, right? And then also like when you look at, in New York City particularly, according to data, I believe this was the census data, there are, over 250,000 Black and Latino men that makes over $60,000 a year, right? So 260,000, right? 250,000 at that, right? So now that's deemed middle class. In New York City, middle class. yeah, right. I mean, I don't know how you could pay for anything with New York City making $60,000 a year, which is unfortunate. You know what I mean? But let's just say, 250,000 Black and brown men in New York City that's in the middle class. What's being done with that segment of the population? Because that segment doesn't necessarily, qualify for some of the, public services that are being had. So they're kind of on their own, right? So where do they go? Many of them graduated college, and thinking that you graduated college, you did the right thing, and then now you make $75,000 a year. But $75,000 a year in New York City, what does that get you, right? And it's so messed up how the city is, for the super wealthy. And I don't even want to, get to that conversation. But my main premise is what's being done for the Black and brown men and families that are in the middle class, and where do they go, and how can they take it to the next level?
It's interesting because I always feel like there's a lot of services available, but it's for low-income earners or high-income earners. Yeah. Like the middle class, especially even with housing. Like there's a lot of the HDFC deals that are available. It's like it's a great deal on an apartment or a house, but you have to have like $200,000 in cash. It's like what middle class person has $200,000 in cash laying around? So it's like a lot of these incentives and deals aren't really for the middle class. So it does make things a lot harder for us to move up and progress farther without having that knowledge of your peers to give you extra things.
Also, when I worked for the city, I realized two things. I saw that there's a lot of money in New York City. A lot of money in New York City. Like if we're talking entrepreneurship, so the New York City's annual operating budget is about $90 billion, right? With the B, 90 billion. I'm gonna say this again, and I'm gonna look directly into the camera. $90 billion, right? But in that, procurement, and our people really need to understand procurement and how procurement works. And procurement is New York City contracting services or, business out to vendors, right? So working for the city, when I looked at the service providers that were servicing, young men of color, oftentimes, who was getting those contracts were institutions that were not owned by Black or brown folks, for which, I then saw, wow, you know what, like $1 million here, $10 million here, etc. And it's not by us, which is a huge problem, because a lot of people are profiting off of our demise, and that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But data shows that, right? Data speaks to that. So, people operate in life based off of the level of information they've obtained. So I've saw these contracts being awarded. I'm like, wait, how much? And to who? So then when I resigned, I then said, what, I wanted to do two things. One, add value to, black and brown boys, right? But then I also said, how do I now build the infrastructure and the capacity to do so, right? So then when I learned how to do business with New York City, that's when I started Groomed Success LLC, which is a certified minority-owned business company, certified from the city, so that we could get contracts to provide services for this segment of the population. So we contract with ACS, the Administrative for Children's Services, where we're going into the group homes and we're doing trainings with the young men there. We're in a lot of the schools within the New York City Department of Education, where we're doing a lot of workforce development, mentorship, programming there. Also in the jails and throughout the city, right? So, and then these are contracts, right? And the reason why I speak to it like that is because I want everyone to realize that they can, get contracts with the city for speaking engagements, graduations, mentorship programs. And there's lots of money there, right? That needs to be given to us. And they're just waiting for us to take it.
I guess just some closing things. So where can people find information on these government contracts and the type of money that's actually out there?
They can Google MWBE, New York City, where there's also a mandate now for the city of New York to award contracts to women, minority-owned certified companies, right? So this is a huge thing, and I'm always going to be preaching about this, right? Get certified, get like establish an LLC where you can, provide these services. So, they could just Google MWBE, New York City, and, they could also, reach out to me, and then I don't mind being a resource there, New York City Department of Small Business Services, Greg Bishop and his team is doing a fantastic job. He's the commissioner, so there's lots of, ask Alexa, ask Siri, right? You know what I mean? But yeah, but that's definitely, and then I definitely encourage folks, and then, like, and I want to be clear too. So with the services that we provide, it's B2B, right? So it's business to business with New York City, so like we're not charging like a church or, $500 an hour, for services, right? No. But if New York City that has budgets for these services with a $90 billion budget, that's who you do business with, right? So that you can provide great services to the segment of the population that you love so dearly.
On creating these two business ventures, I think a lot of times when it comes to human service industries, people automatically say, oh, this is a nonprofit. Can you speak on the difference between choosing to do for-profit versus not-profit, especially in service industry?
So it's understanding the market, right? So my market is doing business to business with government, so my market isn't B2C, business to consumer. So I'm not charging a mom, I'm not charging a dad, I'm charging the government that has the budget for this, right? So it's really important from a business lens to understand what your business model is, because my business model isn't business to consumer, it's business to business. And I knew that based upon the experience that I had working in government. So think about it, right? So if you've worked for an institution that you've now seen, contracts going out for tens of thousands of dollars for work that that you could do with your eyes closed, you should then now turn on your hat to say, how can I do that too and better? And if you also see that, those contracts are being awarded to people who don't look like you, but who are servicing the population that you love so dearly, then you then now have to say, how can you do that too and provide even greater value to the population that you love so dearly? So it's really understanding your market and the problem is that you're trying to solve, right? So like we really need to, our community needs to talk about business, need to talk about money, need to talk about business development and scaling, because when I hear that folks are, going into the schools volunteering, which is an amazing thing, but when you see that the New York City Department of Education has a $30 billion operating budget, and you're not, and then you're volunteering your services, which is great, but you could be getting paid for that, and they're actually looking to pay you because they have a budget line for those types of services. But if you don't know, then they're not going to tell you, because why would they pay for something when you're saying that you give it for free? Yeah. But if there's, again, New York City Department of Education has a $30 billion annual operating budget, and to put it into context, the state of New Jersey's annual operating budget is about $32 billion. So if the New York City Department of Education's budget is almost the size of the state of New Jersey, then I think that we need to look at how we could be a part of that $30 billion conversation,
Wrapping up something new that you're doing, or something that you recently accomplished, and where the people can find you and your organizations.
So, I'm really looking forward to 2020. 2020 is going to be a really big year. And my whole purpose in life, one of my purposes, right, is really letting the world know that we are not 3/5 of a person, right? That we all have the wherewithal, the ability, the capacity to, fully experience the American dream, right? And that we're not lesser than anyone else. And, we are smart, we're talented, we're resilient people, and the world should recognize that and not brand us as lesser than. So that's my whole passion, and it's bringing guys together so that we could fully embrace and tackle the resources that this world needs to offer. So with the Gentleman's Factory, we are expanding. We're looking to open up more Gentleman's Factories throughout New York City, throughout the country, throughout the world, and this is just the beginning. And from the Groomed Success, and, looking to see how we could continue to add more value to young men of color. So I'm a data guy, so I always love to see, okay, what's out there, how do we measure our effectiveness, and how can we make sure that what we're doing, it has great value, so that we can scale that all throughout. So this is only the beginning, man. So I'm like devoting my life into finding innovative solutions that enhances the quality of life of people of color all across planet Earth. So this is just the beginning, right? And the best practices are out there, and I'm looking to see, okay, how can we get better? How can we innovate? How can we, continue to build together? So, society, this is only the beginning, guys. All right,
Okay, and where can people find you and your organization?
So, make sure that you all follow Gentleman's Factory on Instagram, and it's at Gentleman's Factory. And the website, gentlemansfactory.com. So it's gentlemen, not gentleman. So it's with a MENS. And myself, it's Mr. Community NYC. And for Groomed Success, if you are a administrator, a principal, a superintendent, do reach out to groomsuccess.com. You see how from a business lens, you see how I didn't say a parent or someone, you know what I mean? So you got to know your audience, right? So that was just a business tip for the entrepreneurs, right? So know who your consumer base is. But, again, super passionate about this, and I'm super honored to be a part of this podcast, man. I'm happy that I dressed up today so I could be amongst these handsome gentlemen right here, So definitely, man. Definitely, gentlemen.
Oh, Jeff, thank you. You already know.
Thanks, bro. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
The format is real sickening, contagious.
Here I come, Daisy. There you go, there you go.
How we get down,
The format is real sickening, contagious.
Here I come, Daisy. There you go, there you go.
How we get down,
Daisy.
down, down.
Here I come, Jay-Z. Here I come, Jay-Z. Here I come, there you go. Here I